All right.
Recording started. Cool.
Recording started.
So now we can get rolling with your questions. So let them rip. And thanks for coming in on the holiday time. It's good to see everybody.
Absolutely.
Let's see here. So the first question is we've already punished Mikkel for accidentally kicking somebody out of the meeting. So that's not going to happen again. Right, Mikkel?
Well, I can't now, right?
You can, or did somebody put you back? No, okay.
Anyways.
Okay, so let's ask some actual questions.
So are containers GA, I think is the first question.
Okay.
Yes, that is the first question.
So it is. Yes.
And yes, they are.
Yep. Containers both on Linux and Windows.
Yes. What is not GA, what's the preview feature, is running reliable services with inside containers.
Right. But that's coming.
Yep. And another facet to this is that composed deployment of containers is also still a preview feature. So if you keep in the path of deploying what we used to call guest containers, or containers not containing reliable services, and deploying them using the application and service manifest XML files, you're under general availability support.
Are you answering the question about the SDK in the containers?
Nope, it was just the first question of are containers GA'd? I guess we'll get to the next one.
Never mind.
We'll get to that one next.
That's fine.
No, it's not next, actually.
We'll get to that one when it shows up in the order.
With the Espen. Do you see it?
Yeah, Espen.
Yeah, okay.
So seed nodes. So if you happen to lose a majority of seed, if this is an Azure cluster, then if seed nodes are going down and staying down, then Service Fabric will automatically promote other nodes to be the seed nodes and distribute them across the fault domains and generally try and keep whatever the desired number is up per the reliability tier of your cluster. If you do manage to lose a majority of seed nodes and they stay down and don't come back and we can't reconfigure the cluster to add more back, then the cluster will collapse and then reboot. So what will happen is all of the nodes will go down because they start losing arbitration at the federation layer. They will go down, they will come back up and try and reestablish communication with a majority of the seeds. So to know exactly what would happen in your scenario, we need to know which ones failed and how many and why they're not coming back. I would just say that if you see your cluster sitting in that situation where seeds are going down and not coming back for some reason, that's definitely a support issue that you should open and try and figure out what's going on there. Losing one or two is not the end of the day for any reasonably sized cluster. But as you start approaching a majority of seed nodes, then you start getting nervous. But again, all it will do is it'll be like a power outage effectively, right? If the power shut off simultaneously for the whole cluster and then came back, Service Fabric will bootstrap itself using those seeds and then restart all the services. So it's not like it's going to wipe out the cluster permanently or anything like that. We use the seed nodes to let new nodes in, so they have to talk to a majority of the seed nodes, and then the seed nodes are also used for arbitration in case any other nodes can't talk and need to figure out if they're dead or something else is dead. Other than that, they're not special in any way, and the normal reconfiguration protocol will move them around in the cluster as necessary. So I hope that answers that question.
So I guess Jamie has the next question about if there's a plan to be able to install the Service Fabric SDK in a Docker container, and your scenario is for build processes, and you're having issue with the lease layer driver. Yes, this is a known issue. It's actually a limitation in Windows containers. So we have a dependency on Windows to help us solve this, but we're working on it. We have a roadmap for it. It's going to take a little bit because of this dependency for Windows to give us the support we need to get our lease driver running inside a container. So this is for the Windows side of things. For Linux, we actually already have Service Fabric running in containers. If you go to a documentation side, and I'll just kind of bring it up. If you go to the documentation side and look at the Linux dev setup, we actually tell you how you can start running Service Fabric Linux in a container. So Sorry?
Not. It's actually the Mac developer environment setup.
There you go. Thanks, Sana. So I'll just bring this up here so you can see this. Ooh, microservices with Service Fabric. How to set up your development environment. Was it a Mac one?
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go. So this actually tells you how to install Docker on Mac, which is fine. And then you have the Service Fabric OSS /service-fabric-1 box, which is it's a Ubuntu-based Docker image, which contains the scripts and to download and set up a cluster within the container. We're working on seeing if we can take this further and having it a ready and runnable cluster inside the container, but currently you need to pull the container down and then run some scripts inside the container to set up your cluster. There's a little bit of Docker daemon configuration you also have to do. And of course you can expose any number of ports you want from the container to your host. Then you simply hook into a bash shell in the container and you run these two scripts, set up and run the two shell scripts that are in the container. That will set up a 3-node cluster within inside the one container. So it sort of simulates how we use one-box dev containers today. We've actually talked about, I don't know if anybody got around to it, if you could just run like a real cluster in containers, so running 3 containers. It should be possible to do that if you get your networking configuration right and you use the right cluster manifest when you set up the cluster inside containers.
Yeah, I just don't know if we have an example of it yet.
We don't have an example. I don't know if anyone actually done it, but we consider it. A fun thing that I know you've done, Sadanra, is you actually ran the Linux cluster in a container on a Windows machine.
Yeah, so something you can do is actually run a Linux cluster inside this container at the same time as a Windows cluster. So I was able to set up a developer environment with both Windows and Linux clusters running on the same machine, and you can target your apps to deploy on both things. So you can do that today.
Yep. I guess the time frame for getting the Windows container work, it's not like a few months, so it's more like 6 months at least.
So next question from Greg. Give me a second to kind of parse this stuff here.
Yes.
Uh,
Mainly about the
Yeah, it's a little long. Sorry.
yeah,
Wanted to be specific though.
Yeah. So I guess you need to figure out whether you should use app settings, the JSON, or you should do parameters. Is that sort of the gist of it?
That's sort of it. I mean, you get your app settings file, and of course we have certain things in the application parameter file that are going to come along. But when you create a .NET Core application, you're going to use the app settings file is created by default. When we add a database connection string, if you use something like services.configure, it uses app settings. .json. I didn't know if there's any way. I think with the application parameter file, it can contain many different data types, but I don't think there's any way to point services.configure to the application parameter file. So we have this second file introduced.
So there are two things you can do with the app parameters. So the app parameters hook into the manifest files. So the app manifest and can also potentially hook into the service manifest files. Neither of those files are aware of the app settings.json or can interact with that. But what they are aware of are config files in Service Fabric. So if you use a config package that goes with your code package, that's one way of doing it. The other thing they're aware of would be environment variables. So those are basically the two things that your code can end up rely on if you want to use the parameters concept when creating applications to ingest environment-specific configuration.
Right.
Yeah, and actually, I knew that I'd read an example of how to do this to combine them all, and Brett actually found the article for me and pasted the link So there's a way to combine these all together.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
Yes.
This actually, I knew that I'd read through this. I haven't done it myself, but if Brett's swearing by it, then it's probably good.
All right, awesome.
But this is one way to get kind of a unified view.
Okay, so so what you do is you set up your own configuration provider that basically reads
wraps
from
around.
the config file, and then you use parameters on top of your config file.
Awesome. I will.
Does that make sense?
Great.
Well, as I read it, I'm sure it will. So, okay, that gets the application settings.json and the parameter file together. The third file that we get added, and I guess I know Brett's on the chat at least, is the app.config, because we're reaching outside to a WCF service, and then that connection of that web service endpoint gets put into an app.config. Would that solution handle that config also?
Sorry, I lost you.
Yeah, it's another app config. I don't know a good story for app config. I mean, maybe this same mechanism would work. You could extend it.
Yeah, we'll have to dig into it. Okay, well, hey, from 3 to 2.
So I think basically what this guy is doing is he's just integrating the config packages in Service Fabric directly in the configuration builder. So he's not using app settings JSON, but still using config packages, but reading them, hooking your code up to them in an easy way.
I'll have to read through it.
But basically, the parameter concepts in Service Fabric supports either environment variables or overriding stuff in your config files. So your code needs to get to either of those, and then there are, in this case, it's using a, iConfiguration builder to get to the config file, but you can also just read it off environment variables. So those are basically your options. Yep.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you.
Okay. Next question.
It's pretty empty in there.
Yeah. Whatever. Any updates on the timeline for Azure Managed Service Identities and Service Fabric?
Wait a minute. Did we miss
No.
Marcine's question?
Oh,
I'm sorry. Is that
we
his
did.
question?
Marcine's. Oh, I did skip Marcine's. I'm sorry.
Oh, the SF volume driver.
It's just a standard container volume driver. I don't know any more. I don't think it's special. It is container-specific magic, that's for sure, today. Today it's not going to work outside of containers. It's specifically, Docker containers have this notion of volume drivers where you attach the driver to the container and it ends up mounting some thing that looks like local storage from within the container, but is actually provided by something else. That something else, it could be a local drive. That something else could be a remote blob store thing. There's some vendors out there that sell these kinds of drivers that add on additional monitoring and telemetry and things like that. Ours is going to be implemented by, as we mentioned, a replicated block store within the cluster itself. But that's really just a storage abstraction concept that containers expose and that we're going to take advantage of to provide this functionality. So container-specific magic is about my level of understanding of it as well, and I think that you can think of it that way.
So Marcin, you have one question. Is it going to work outside of containers? Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Are you thinking about basically just file-level replication within the cluster?
I'm thinking about, I'm trying to understand how it is going to work, and I'm considering many different scenarios because, for example, Azure Files volume driver will work like a volume attached to the host node, and then some subfolders from this host node will be attached to the container. And I am thinking if such a file system would be accessible from the host node. So if it is like a filter driver implemented in the Windows or something like that, that will make this accessible. I don't have any specific scenarios. I'm like only exploring the ideas and trying to think how it will gonna work.
So what you can do today is you can mount an Azure file share on your host nodes and share that in your container. I think we're actually working on an Azure file storage driver that will mount the Azure file share directly in the container, not through the host node, which is what you can do today.
Yes.
So I actually don't know, but the SF volume driver, the main point about that is that it will use our replication technology within the cluster to, preserve your state. So whether we're actually going to do just file-based replication between the hosts or how that's going to work, the main point is that it's all within the cluster. You can get the same, performance benefits of reliable collections by having, state stored locally.
Yeah.
Whereas the Azure file thing,
It's going
everything
remote,
is
and it
it's
has to
going
be
remote
remounted,
to
and yeah,
Azure storage.
yeah.
Do you plan to retain the full POSIX semantics or something like that on this as a volume driver? Because I have been testing some different file systems to run RocksDB on top of this. And for example, Azure Files mounted using CIFS driver from Linux does not work because it's missing some Flash, dir APIs or something like that. The CIFS mounts are not really POSIX compliant in Linux. So there are. Are you focusing on POSIX compliance, or it is like a utility for some purposes, like block store or something?
Yeah, it's more like a block store. I haven't heard of anything specifically that would block us from POSIX compliance, but I also haven't been focusing on it at all. So I don't know if it's going to be guaranteed to be POSIX compliant or not. But that's an interesting thing that we should probably look at. Are there any updates on the timeline for Azure MSI? So MSI is still kind of in preview itself, but it is something that we want to figure out how to integrate into Service Fabric. One of the things to be aware of is that MSI today is kind of VM scale set only. It's only at the VM scale set level that it really deploys the certs. So it might be useful for managing your cluster certs, but it doesn't really solve, if you're looking for like secure communication between individual services, it's still a little hard to figure out how to make that work in a clean way. I know we have an article on this that I'm trying to find.
So there's the difference whether the scenario is your service wants to obtain a managed identity or your cluster wants to obtain a managed identity.
Right. And today it's going to be closer to get it to the cluster identity, and then later we're working actually with the Key Vault guys to build something so that we can do kind of actual managed service identities, right? Today it's more managed VM identities or managed cluster identities.
Managed service.
Yeah, managed service identity in terms of actual services. That's kind of the next step. I'll keep looking for that article, and I will share it with Mark, and we can get it into kind of the show notes. But I don't have that at hand right now. But yeah, it's a known thing where we want to make this work seamlessly so that you can get out of the cert management and rotation business for managing cluster security.
Yeah, I was looking at it more from like a secrets perspective. Essentially granting the services a way to actually get to the Key Vault and manage the secrets without having to, pass in like SPA credentials or anything like that.
Right. And where that gets a little tricky, so yes, it's great for that, where you can get kind of that bottom turtle cert onto the machine, right? I mean, that's what it is. So then you can, it's turtles all the way down, and this is on the bottom. MSI gets you there, right? And then you can use that to go up to Key Vault and pull down specific things. Just as a word of caution, when you do that, make sure to test your upgrade and failover scenarios, because we have seen cases where if you have a heavily loaded Service Fabric cluster with hundreds of services, and then you do an upgrade, and they all start back up, read the MSI cert that's on the machine, and then go to Key Vault. We've actually seen cases where that DOSes Key Vault. And you get throttled, and the back off logic is kind of weird. And you can end up throttled for a period of time. So just something to be aware of. That's part of why we want to get to MSI for rotating those secrets natively on the machine, so that they kind of get pushed down, so that way the services don't have to go do this off-box call and talk to this other remote service. It also gives you kind of this rollout pattern, so that if anything bad is pushed up in, say, Key Vault, it's rolling out in the cluster, and then that way there's an opportunity to interrupt it and see that it's making things unhealthy and all that stuff. So you have an opportunity to push back. That's kind of where we want to get to, and we're working with the Key Vault guys to enable that functionality. So anyway, just what you have is fine. That's totally how it's going to work today. I would just recommend making sure that you're not DOSing Key Vault accidentally, because they will throttle you, and then you have a startup or secret management problem. That's all.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. This is the next one.
So the next question is about how to host multiple apps in Service Fabric, which each app having multiple domains, and using application gateway with Service Fabric apps. So I just pulled up a doc article we have of how we're doing integration with API management. So basically the question is about how do you create a gateway through applications and services that reside inside your cluster. And there are multiple options. Sad to say, we're still at this point where we don't have like one clear good recommendation, because there are lots of things you can do. There's some things in the product, but you still have to stitch a little bit of things to the story is still that you have to stitch something together yourself a little bit in certain scenarios. So the main issue that you want to solve is that the Azure load balancer that you set up with your Service Fabric cluster today, you only do like port resolution of services through well-known ports. So if your services within your cluster are listening on a well-known port that you're going to define, you can use the Azure load balancer to make sure that whenever you hit a certain port, you always talk to that specific service within inside the cluster. The sort of down, what you need to be aware of here is that you need to coordinate ports between your services within inside your cluster, and you can only rely on the Azure load balancer's ability to probe whether a service is healthy based on whether it receives certain response from that, from probing that specific port. So that's sort of what you see here described in this diagram today. What you really want to get to is you want to get to some sort of integration with service resolution inside the cluster through the naming service or through some other means. And there are various ways you can do that. So Azure API management is one way of doing it. So basically what the Azure API management guys built into their service is the integration with the Service Fabric naming service. So whenever your application needs to talk to a service, API management resolves the service socket within inside the cluster and simply proxies and forwards the request for that. Now I saw that Marcin also replied to this thread that there are other similar proxy concepts out there where you basically run that gateway service, the equivalent of the API management here, that interacts with the naming service and service resolution. Just run it as a stateless or stateful service within inside the cluster, and there are a few implementations of those out there. I think there are already some links that's been shared.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
To be able to do that. Then we also there was recently an integration with a proxy called Traffic that was released, which is basically enabling Traffic as a reverse proxy to integrate with the Service Fabric naming service. That's a fairly easy solution because it's a one-time installation and it's driven by configuration within the cluster. Application Gateway doesn't have integration with Service Fabric service resolution and naming service today. We have discussed it, but I don't know if there's any specific roadmaps.
They don't have a great way for us to plug in the resolution code.
Yeah.
So that we had this discussion when we were evaluating both App Gateway and API Management for which one we wanted to do integration with. And we went with API Management mainly because they had a mechanism for injecting custom code and wanted to work with Service Fabric to enable that sort of traffic routing scenarios. We understand that App Gateway is, for a lot of workloads, a more natural choice, but just technically right now, it's very hard to actually do that integration with that particular product. So we're looking at that, but as Mikhail mentioned, there's also lots of other options out there for solving this problem. And if API management is not, what you're looking for, running one of these provided proxies like Trafic or the upcoming Envoy stuff, or writing a little gateway depending upon your actual requirements might be the best option. This doc that Mikhail's got here does cover a lot of these options, so it's a pretty good place to start.
So the one thing to say about API management is it adds, so API management as a service, it's differentiated, is really around managing how you expose and basically sell APIs and policies around those. So it's a fairly high level service. It has a certain cost to it as well. So in many scenarios, running a simple stateless service as a gateway inside your cluster is a good solution. You mentioned application gateway, I think I saw in one of the other comments, and there's an application gateway inside Service Fabric, but that's basically the reverse proxy just exposing all services in the cluster to the outside, and you probably don't want to go that route because there's no way of configure which service to expose and which not to expose. There's no way to rewrite the URLs and doing path forwarding and those kind of things.
So you wouldn't want to go directly to the reverse proxy, but you could say front the reverse proxy with App Gateway and use App Gateway. You have to be very specific on your rules there. I don't honestly know if they let you be as specific as you need to be, but you need to look for certain incoming HTTP URIs and then rewrite them to call the Service Fabric reverse proxy corresponding HTTP address. I'm not aware of how to do that with App Gateway, but I think it should be possible. I would have to dig in more and really validate that in order to be sure.
One last comment. You mentioned Envoy. We didn't really put it. So we are working on a to solve this sort of once and for all, hopefully. We have picked up collaboration with the guys behind the open source project called Envoy, which basically comes out of Lyft, I think.
Yeah, Lyft initially did it.
And there are multiple things to that. First of all, we started porting it into Windows so that it runs both across Windows and Linux. And we want to substitute the current reverse proxy we have in our product with Envoy because it gives us a lot more flexibility and robustness in terms of how we can use it. So basically get to the level where you can start talking about having service mesh concepts with inside Service Fabric, and also using Envoy as the gateway, a highly configurable gateway that integrates with service resolution and service mesh concepts with inside Service Fabric. So that's sort of the roadmap for Service Fabric itself to bring this, which will then work across, Azure standalone, wherever you deploy your cluster. I guess the roadmap is probably like,
I don't know,
6 months out to get to a point where this is.
It's the default, and you're just done. Okay.
The first part of that question was really around how do we go about doing multiple domains, right? So we understand application gateway won't work, but I have like multiple vanity domains to a single web application there, and want to use the key vault to store my SSLs and still be able to add them on the fly.
Yeah, the App Gateway is good for those vanity URLs. The problem is then you still have to have something in between App Gateway and your actual services that understands Service Fabric is going to move the services around, or they might not be on every machine and things like that. So App Gateway is fine to solve the vanity URL problem, but then you still need something to do the actual routing. If on the doc that you look at, this doc that Mikkel pulled up, basically pick one of the solutions that works whether your service is stateless or stateful, and you're going to have to inject that in between App Gateway and your service, just like you would if you were going to talk directly to the Azure Load Balancer. you still have to have something that understands service fabric and how to find where the actual service is running. If your service is stateful and it's running on all the nodes all the time, then you can basically, there's no additional work to do. App Gateway is just going to forward on to some HTTP address, and the load balancer is going to pick it up and spray it around. But if you have more specific rules, or if you're dealing with stateful services, then you're going to have this additional routing layer.
So, going through the way, if all you need is just a second domain for the same app, or is it second domain for a second app?
It's a second domain for the same app, right? So my cluster has.
So yeah, okay. If it's the exact same endpoint, your Azure load balancer basically just has an IP. So either you set up a domain, with an A record for that IP, or you do a CNAME on top of the DNS name of the IP sitting on the load balancer, and that will basically be it. And then expose, the app port in the load balancer. That's the very, low-level simple solution for that.
Right. Slight twist there, the fact that I need to understand the domain it's coming through to be able to make slight changes to the UI.
Sure. If your service doesn't handle that, you need something in front to do that, of course. Yes.
Yeah, that's.
Other than that, in that scenario, your service should get the original HTTP request directly from the client.
Okay. We'll try that out. Thanks.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Let's see where we are here.
Jamie?
No, Marcin said the thing.
Jamie just want to know about Linux containers running on Windows servers. It's not possible today. I know it's a feature that Windows is working on. The scenario we talked about earlier was on a Windows 10 box, where you can run containers in Hyper-V. Basically, the way that Docker works with Linux containers on a Windows 10 box is that you run a virtual machine where you host the Linux containers inside that virtual machine. That's not a scenario you want to apply to a server. So it's coming, but it's not there today.
I'm sorry, could you come back to my question, because it was quite different, this one.
Oh, sorry, Mazen. Let's see. Question about the custom proxy.
I would keep it the way that you currently have it.
Yeah.
I would keep it the way that you currently have it. I wouldn't go with a centralized property store in any sense. That's kind of what you already have. So instead of even having that stateful service, I would put the config for what to do into actual config, and I would roll it out via configuration upgrades. That way, if that stateful service is ever down or unavailable for some reason, or if you put data into it that is incorrect, you don't blow up all the routing in the cluster simultaneously. And that's true with the property store or anything else as well. Centralized config has that problem of one bad entry can hose all your whatever it is that is pulling out of that config. So I would recommend not even having that stateful service and just rolling out config changes in a more granular fashion, so that anything that does get deployed has a chance to roll back if it starts to cause issues.
The problem is that that config is rolled using rolling upgrades, and I'm not convinced whether I want to do rolling upgrades here. So, but one more question. Why do you think that the idea of stateful service and this second, I know that this is not a recommended scenario, but I would like to understand why it is. Why is it recommended? What could go wrong with this approach with primary replica and secondary replicas distributed across the nodes, and which replica will listen on a IP address, and then it will use the standard replication mechanism to replicate the rules from primary to secondaries. So
there's two problems. One is that, remember that replication is always quorum. So at any point, only slightly more than half of those replicas will have the updated information at any given point in time. So now you have all of the tearing and weirdness of a rolling upgrade without the mechanisms of a rolling upgrade, where different replicas see the data at different times. So that's kind of problem one. Problem two is another thing related to replication, which is that you can get into situations where secondaries are exposing information that is committed, right? It's transactionally consistent, but which ends up never being actually quorum act. So it reaches the secondary commits the operation. It starts, if you start asking it for its data, it shows you that data. If that operation never completes on all the other replicas, and what eventually will happen is that it will go backwards. And you have this weird situation where this replica was serving data from the future for a while. So one of the reasons that reading from secondaries is really dangerous, and you have to kind of know what you're doing in order for it to be safe for a given workload. So the third thing is just kind of also just what I said about rolling upgrades generally being preferred, which is that if you put something in the stateful service and it ends up being incorrect, you publish an incorrect route, everything that sees that update fails roughly simultaneously. And so you can actually, with these types of mistakes, you can cause really large issues simultaneously globally in the cluster. So let's review, right? It's going to roll out just as weirdly and with torn data as a rolling upgrade. You don't get the safety of rollbacks and monitoring, and you can see weird data from the future that can impact the thing. So for these reasons, I don't want to deal with any of that, right? That all sounds very complicated and scary, and it should. It's clearer just to put it in config and do a config rollout, right? And if there's problems with doing it as a config rollout, then that points that there's something else wrong. The upgrade is misconfigured, the config is not being consumed in a graceful manner, the settings that are being used to trigger the upgrade could be tuned better, things like that. I would rather solve those problems than try and solve all the other problems related to the central stateful, config global update model.
Thanks, Matt. I think you are right here, and I will need to explore the possibility of doing config upgrade from code, from C# code. It's probably possible, but why I got caught in a wrong approach is probably because the default approach is with all these packages and stuff, and it is probably possible to roll out config in some easier manner just from C# code, yes?
Yep. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yep.
So thanks a lot.
Yeah, go down that route and let us know if you have any questions that come out of it, but I'd rather take that approach.
Okay, so I think we're at,
we did the Linux container one.
so the API, so Brad has a question about the API management integration where you need to go through the load balancer and then the traffic. So yeah. So
time to draw the whiteboard, right? Or is,
no,
I
think it's actually here. We are just right here. So basically, your question is no, it's not there. Anyways, what happens in this scenario is that when API management, can I draw directly in this? That would be awesome. No. Yeah. Oh yeah. Edge feature. Whew. There you go. Whoa. Okay. So what API management is basically doing is that. And I think your question is that to do this resolution, API management talks through the load balancer to get the resolution, and then once the request comes in, API management talks through the load balancer, and then finally the request gets forwarded to the specific service, and I think it's this communication through the load balancer to do the actual resolution that the question is about. The only thing that API management is doing is actually using the Azure load balancer to find a naming service within the cluster. So it's because that naming services runs in -1 number of instances, typically, meaning it runs in any node. So it's just easier for API management just to use an Azure load balancer, port forwarding to find any responsive naming service within the cluster to do that resolution. I don't know. I think the way that you configure API management, you actually give it an endpoint to get to the naming service. I don't think it has to be the Azure load balancer, but I don't know what it would be if it wasn't the Azure load balancer. Then you would have to rely on your own gateway to find a naming service. And
Yeah,
it's
you're,
like,
you're back into the same thing where you just deliver it to some node and hope that there has to be some gateway there to re-forward it. You could deliver it to any node and naming is going to be there, but it's not entirely clear how without the load balancer it would necessarily work. This is another thing where we're trying to enhance API management in order to let it sit directly inside the VNet and be able to know what nodes to go talk to. It can already sit inside the VNet, but it still has to use this load balancer in order to get bounced around to the nodes to talk to the cluster. So, yep, just a thing. But yeah, good point.
The next one, Whit. He's saying, are there any plans to support adding secondary cluster certificates
Via the portal?
Yeah, via the portal.
I don't know. I know that we talked about it. I even think I saw a mock-up for it.
so mock-up to code, just like.
Yeah, yeah. It goes these days like mock-up, then markdown, then code or something, like, or the other way around. I can't keep this straight anymore. But yeah, we know that that's a harder scenario. Today it's only ARM. Portal's in lockdown for the holidays for the foreseeable future.
But it is actually being discussed.
It is being discussed.
Okay.
It is being discussed. I mean, we want to generally make the portal easier to use in exposing all these types of scenarios. I don't like having people having to go to ARM for basic operations because you just end up with these giant manifests that you always have to republish. Yeah, on the whole, I know we've talked about it, but I don't know when it will show up.
Yeah, so there is right now we actually have a little bit of a task force initiative to get you off unsecure clusters.
Yeah.
We're basically a little bit tired of talking about unsecure and secure clusters. We rather just want to talk about clusters that are secure.
Yeah.
Which
or just clusters.
In simplicity makes a lot more sense. So across, PowerShell, CLI, Portal, all of these kind of things, the whole experience of configuring clusters in the right way so that they are secured and managing certificates, we have a specific effort going on there to make that easier.
Jamie's question on zero downtime of a service. Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to have two listeners on the service, one that is responding to the load balancer health probes and one that is actually handling the service requests. And when close comes in, they'll see them both of those endpoints will see it at the same time. The health probe one should close immediately, and then the actual service one should only close after whatever your health probe duration and number of failed counts is. So if you have the load balancer configured to say probe every 5 seconds and to require 2 failures before marking the service as unhealthy and not routing traffic there anymore, then you'd have your main service listener pause the close for 10 or 15 seconds before actually shutting down. And that guarantees that the health probes have failed and the load balancer has taken you out of rotation before the service actually shuts down, so any resulting requests still show up and are working. And so Michael's going to draw a line.
Yeah, I think this needs to do because
this is pictures worth at least as many words as I spewed out.
So basically, if this is your endpoint, let's call it the service endpoint. Let's say this is HTTP, just for the simplicity here. This is where you actually API or whatever it is being served. So you have your client sitting over here. It goes through the load balancer. This is supposed to be a client. And then the load balancer forwards that, let's just say, for the ease of everything, port 80 requested, I think. Now, what the load balancer is doing is basically doing probing. But the way that the load balancer is set up is that probing could be any port. So we're trying to make up for the Azure load balancer only, being very layer 3-ish as a load balancer. 4? Layer 3, 4? 4? Layer 4, oh yeah, that's
3.4.
3.4. We're making up for that by, getting some, application level intelligence and build that into our own service. So what you do is you set up another HTTP endpoint, and we should call that the probe endpoint. So basically, your service has to expose these 2 endpoints. Let's say this is a probe endpoint. We run under port 81. So in the load balancer, you configure it to load balance port 80 to port 80, but you configure that load balancing rule to, to have its health being based on probing port 81 within your service. So what Matt is saying is that when Service Fabric comes along down here and tells the service to go and close the endpoint, because that's one of the signals we send to your service whenever we need to move you or upgrade you. What you do is within the what's it called? Unclose? What is it called?
Yeah, close async.
Close async method. What you do is you then keep this guy alive by keep sending 200 messages back to the load balancer.
The other way. You want to kill the probe.
No, well, you want to keep the probe alive until you're sure that you
have
drained the service, right?
Sure.
So basically, you want to coordinate how these two close and how they drain the connection and whatever work is going on by instructing the load balancer your health through the probe, but having your service continue to run, the request until it's.
Typically, what we see is that you want to shut the probe down for whatever your probe interval and all that stuff is. You then want to shut the endpoint down after the probe interval times the number of failed counts has passed, and then you shut the whole service down when all the requests that made it in before you shut the service endpoint down actually complete. So there's a little pending work.
So first, shut down this guy to not have new incoming requests.
Yes.
Number two,
shut down that.
Shut down this guy.
And then third, shut down the actual service object, right? When all of the work that was pending that got in before the door got closed actually completes.
Yeah, that's
great. Does that make sense? Hopefully that answers the question. It's a nice little dance that you have to do, but that's pretty standard for dealing with the Azure Load Balancer. That's why they have like separate endpoints, and you can have a probe endpoint that's not the same as your actual service endpoint.
So let's say it wants to run API management in a container on-prem. Reading configs from the Azure service, just being able to create it. So
yeah, I don't know that they're ever going to ship API management on-prem or in a container, but that would be great. It would be really nice. I know that they promote API management as a tool for exposing on-prem APIs. But today, all of that does have to come up through Azure. So that's feedback, and that's good feedback, and it's a scenario we've heard before, and we'll pass it on to the APM guys. They'll just point me at Envoy. We did that. Currently, my cloud services hosting apps, and each app has its own key vault. Do I have to follow the same, or can I use one key vault to store the secrets? Yeah, you can use one key vault if it's okay per your security reviews. You just have to be comfortable with the fact that Key Vault basically only has one way of getting in, and so if you have multiple services that all have the same Key Vault access code, that they can all read most of the secrets inside of there. I don't know whether or not they've done sub-resource security RBAC for individual secrets within the Key Vault. I'd have to go check. I know they've talked about it. The only other thing you'd have to worry about besides that is the scale stuff and throttling that I mentioned earlier. Just be aware that there are quotas on this stuff, and that if you have a large number of calls coming into Key Vault at the same time, they will throttle you. Your code just has to be ready for that exception when it comes back. But from Service Fabric perspective, we don't really mind either way. You can certainly use one Key Vault to manage all sorts of secrets. So the question is, there was talk about providing a backup service as well as a reliable state explorer. These are still in the works, absolutely. The backup and restore service is, I think we've previewed it on, there's a Yammer group called Azure Advisors and then Service Fabric Advisors that you can join, just join it. We have provided a couple previews of the backup and restore service there and asked for feedback. Based on some of that feedback, we're making some improvements. We're also working on cleaning up the API for it. We should probably do another preview of it at some point if it's going to take longer for us to get it out there. I would expect that a public preview of that lands sometime in the new year, pretty early, and you can take it from there. But that is something that is in progress.
So, Mark, how do you join?
I'll send the link. I'm going to put the link right now.
So Mike's going to post a link on how you get into the Yammer network.
The Reliable State Explorer is also something we're doing. There's one that already exists.
Yeah, so the reliable state explorer is like, there are two concepts. There is the, so I guess what we have showed is in Service Fabric Explorer how you can basically get to the data that's within your reliable dictionaries.
I will post the link and
you will post the link and I can click on it. There you go.
Teamwork. You want to say no? You don't care about your drawing?
Well, no. Okay, so Jesse is one of our Azure Cat guys. Azure Cat guys, whatever. He's a Microsoft employee.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
He's a guy. People don't know what an Azure Cat guy is.
He is a real human being.
He's not a cat.
Yeah.
He's a cloud advocate. Whatever.
It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Internal Microsoft weirdness.
So this is the GitHub repo. What he's done, he's done some ASP.NET Core middleware that you can inject into your ASP.NET Core services, and it basically exposes your reliable collection as an OData endpoint. This is the repo where you do that. So that's the first part of things, and then what he's done is he's done some prototyping of putting some UI on top of that OData endpoint within South Service Fabric Explorer. So that's sort of the base of it, but just exposing the OData endpoint can give you the ability to go and query whatever data you have. So you can do that today by using this project. What we're doing for Service Fabric Explorer, and I think there was the next question.
Yeah, are we going to make that more extensible?
Yes. So what we will probably release very, very soon is a standalone version of this. So now I'm attending this meeting, so I actually can't demo it. Other than that, I could.
Yeah.
But what we've done is we've taken Service Fabric Explorer, the web version, we've wrapped it up in an Electron shell, so we can run it on a Windows machine, Linux machine, and soon Mac. And the idea, what we want to do is, first of all, we want to make sure that we sort of enable ourselves to decouple when we release updates to Service Fabric Explorer, so it doesn't have to run with the runtime, which is what we do today because it's hosted inside the cluster. And we're also going to put it on GitHub. We're going to open source the development process. So we're going to take contributions from you guys to how we can put things into Service Fabric Explorer. It is an Angular application today, so it's fairly easy to go and put new stuff into it. But if we need a specific extensibility model or not, I don't know yet. Let's see how this thing takes off. But expect that in January sometime, you will see this version released, and you will see the code and everything on GitHub, and we should
be really neat.
Party on from there.
Yeah, I guess. My IAM session went away. Is Marcin's the next question?
Oh, geez. He won gRPC and Envoy.
Yeah, I don't think we're doing anything around gRPC at this time. I also like protocol buffers, but that's about it.
And then you want to know the reverse proxy contains some kind of circuit breaker?
It doesn't today. It just has basic backoffs and retries. So I mean, I guess a rudimentary one, but nothing super advanced. I'd still probably wrap your calls in Poly or something like that.
So Jose's digging a little bit deeper into the API on-prem. Is what you want to do is you want to expose a local hosted endpoint through API management in Azure. Is that the thing you want to achieve?
Yeah, he wants.
Or is it the full service you want?
He wants the full service on-prem so that the traffic doesn't have to come up with Azure. He says, get the configuration from my Azure portal experience and then bring it down into a device or some service that's running on-prem and expose it from there.
I don't know the story about API management in Azure Stack.
Yeah, I don't know when that was. So that would theoretically be a way to get that.
Expose the same API locally, no API management.
Well, hold on. I don't know where. I don't know where you just jumped to.
Well, he was just elaborating.
Oh, I see. I see.
I don't quite get this still.
Yeah, just the runtime. He wants the runtime of API management on-prem.
Okay.
And I don't know when that would show up. Azure Stack would be the only way that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't know that they're planning to ship it in a container or as a standalone service or anything like that. But we can give them that feedback. Rookshar, yeah, we do upload every
I just got it.
Q&A to YouTube, so you'll see that there.
Yep.
THD asks, we're running out of time, so we're into the lightning round again. I like
lightning
to call it.
round time.
Okay. Service Fabric.
Containers and preview available.
Containers is GA'd and Service Fabric is also GA'd. So go party. There's that. IoT Edge. Is there any chance that the future cross-plat reliable collections will allow working on non-serialized key value store? Probably not soon. We do have a native API for it, but I don't know when we would plan to expose it. We got THG's question, and then Whit said he's got an issue, some validation for the import longer names of clusters.
Okay, let's not. So you're mentioning Azure support and a GitHub issue in the same. Let's just to make this clear, the Service Fabric issue list on GitHub is not driven by Azure support. It's driven by us, the product team. So there are basically no, SLAs or anything in that as you could get if you had paid support in Azure. So just to be clear about that difference, it's on a best effort basis. We of course want to help you as much as we can. So if you have any production issues or things you need, go through Azure support. They have SLAs for helping you out there. We don't on the GitHub issue list.
We're trying, though.
Huh?
We're trying to be responsive.
We're trying to be responsive, but it's basically on a best effort.
Yeah, I would say if it's a production issue, do not rely on the GitHub issues list to help you.
So the best place to file, actually, I want to take you to, we have a document to just show you this.
Yes, nice.
So resources on our doc side.
Well,
good. Support options.
Well, Mikkel's looking that up. To support, to file bugs, the GitHub issues list is really the best spot.
So report production issues or request page support from Azure through the portal. For standalone, it's professional support, premier support. If it's issues you encounter with Service Fabric and not anything you're running like live or in production, you can fall down to GitHub repos and other forums online. And all of these, again, those are driven on a best effort basis, whereas the actual support options that we list in the top is where you would go for things that.
Where is he following them today? Because is there a better place?
Well, he has a link for GitHub issues.
Oh, okay.
Which is why I responded to this.
Yeah, so for that issue, I wouldn't have gone to the issues list. Thank you for filing it there, but I wouldn't let your stuff be off for a week. That's an Azure support thing, and they should really be able to help you out with a better SLA than that. We get bug reports through kind of aggregated stuff out of our support org. It generates incidents. Incidents have both mitigations and then root cause and long-term fixes. So those are things that's one way to get bugs and things fixed. Well, that's unfortunate. That's one way to get a bug filed and fixed is it comes in through support figures it out, product team realizes it's a product issue, and then at some point the fixes get bundled up and get released as a new release. Maybe that's just a portal fix, maybe that's something we need to change in the runtime, maybe it's just a thing that we can fix in a NuGet package and then push that out. Where the bug ends up being will have a material effect on how quickly the fix gets rolled out.
Okay, but ultimately, because I file it through support, they'll trickle down to you eventually.
Yes, absolutely. I see it. People think I'm nuts, but I don't filter out the incidents that get filed. I see it all. So it's in here somewhere, and those do result in material fixes that get rolled out all the time.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So just
out of time.
Masin just asked about when is the soonest new release. Early next year, there will be a feature release 6.1 coming out.
We're gonna try and get these polls in, guys. Please hang out with us for another
as quickly as you can answer
30
some
seconds.
polls.
There we go.
Yeah. We just want to get a little bit of structured feedback on these Q&As.
Yes.
Figuring out who you guys are, if you come here often or not. Here we go. So please just take your time to respond to this. Give us any feedback. Unmute yourself if you want to shout something out.
We're here to hear that as well.
Oh, open the GitHub issue.
Nice. We'll wait for a couple more responses on this first one. Okay. Next. Cool, we got a couple first timers, guys.
Woohoo! Welcome.
Nice. Welcome.
Wow. Awesome. Oh, I'm an attendee. I don't see the responses. You just cut me off every
Very
time.
nice.
Don't
why-
kick people out.
Yeah.
I hear this like, wow, whoa, and I'm just seeing questions on my screen.
Okay, next. I added both.
I know. Oh, we did get both finally.
Yes.
Excellent.
You're
And everyone's realizing.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Yeah, they're all on it now. That's the biggest one.
See, we do take feedback and we do accept bugs, even if it's just in our survey question.
Yes. And we act on your feedback.
We act on your feedback.
Wow, look at that big.
So there you go.
number. Yeah, that was the one.
Cool. Cool.
Okay. I'm so pulling for AA, but that's all right. I won't be biased.
Come on, blog.
Yeah, come on.
Come on, blog.
Where's
I should not be
biased?
biasing. I'm already biasing the results.
Yeah, you are.
Let's do one thing. Let's
Yeah.
let's get people to use the blog link if they don't have it.
Hey,
Director of the Azure
you
Advisor.
posted a link to sign
I
up
did.
for Azure
I
Advisors.
sure did.
You got yours.
I am not
Thanks,
able
And I
to.
believe this is the last one. Yeah, it is.
I don't know that they'll see it just yet until he quits the survey.
I know, but I learned how to do Control-C, Control-V in this guy, which is, there you go. But by the way,
We're 100%
Q&As
that they
are
will come
every
back.
third Thursday of the month, so it's a regular
It's a regular cadence.
cadence.
Yes, it is.
Every third Thursday of the month except for this one,
Right, because
because
this
today is Tuesday, which is like
This
is gonna screw my whole-
I didn't even realize when I said it. It was just like-
But
You
you've
can tell.
also already forgotten it's not Thursday. Like
Yeah.
I think it's Thursday.
It's
right?
my last day before I go on vacation, so I really
Yeah.
don't care anyway.
Okay.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody. Hope everyone, if you have a holiday, I hope you enjoy your holiday.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.